Recording. This is Chris.
And this is Kevin.
It's been a minute, been busy. Got a little
Yep.
sick.
Spring
Girlfriend got
break.
spring break. Girlfriend got a little sick. She's sick now, but we're getting through,
Get the coof.
I guess. Isn't everything the coof now?
Yeah. Yep.
Technically, we're some of the first people in Utah to ever get it.
Yeah. I remember
Some of the
you were
first
the first.
persons.
You're the first person I actually knew that actually.
Well, literally, it was within like the first
Yeah.
50 people of Utah that had official diagnoses. And so we were right at the front in the thick of the things. And the whole entire things seemed way more ridiculous after you'd already been technically exposed to it. So I got to, from April of that first year, I was already watching it all from a place of having been exposed and not getting sick at all. She got a little sick and it wasn't very much at all. She had the official diagnosis. I couldn't get a diagnosis at that time because we were in the middle of like a deadly pandemic and nobody would
Hmm.
even talk to me or take me. And I called all the different places and saying, "Do you need to come test me or something? I mean, I'm for reals exposed to this." And they're like, "Nah, nah, it's okay. Nah, you don't need to. Let us know if you get sick." Yeah, I go, "All right." So that's that. So I've had like 3 or 4 different subjects hot in the mind I wish I could have done, and I feel bad because some of them, it's like, I gotta grab them out of the air or I'm gonna lose them. Even this tonight, we're probably a bit quicker, like, last second than we more normally do, but I also feel like I'm gonna lose the train of thought on it if I don't. I wanted to talk about these things I've been noticing. I've already been talking to you a little bit about it, of, Julia Child.
Hmm.
And how this relates to a lot, it actually relates to a lot of different stuff we talk about in the Mormon academic scene, I believe a whole lot. Let me cut right to the chase. The first time I'm showing like official stuff from a channel of something that might copyright stuff, but it's not like we're monetizing anything.
Yeah. We don't care about no money.
So this is a new show on HBO called Julia. I've already watched all 4 of the episodes that are out right now. It started with 3 and now the 4th just dropped. I like Julia Child. I always liked Julia Child. I remember me and when one of my best friends growing up, a guy you know too, Hooper, we used to
Mm.
go around in the
Talking like
'80s
her.
as little kids, like walk around, "I'm Julia
Yeah.
Child, I'm Julia Child, no, I'm Julia Child."
Yeah. Me and
And
my brothers and sisters do that too.
I think everyone did, and, I mean, probably from watching Sesame Street or something at the time. What else was, I mean, there's other stuff on PBS, but this is one of the channels you might have had on Saturday, and it probably just, like, rolled into Julia Child after a while,
I
and
don't
you
think I knew what wine was until I saw Julia Child in
really.
that movie. I mean, here I was like 7 years old, and we making fun of her with my siblings, and
Well, I
another
remember
bottle of Merlot, please.
I remember sometimes being freaked out at some of the food she made, like, "Here's an entire duck, eat the brains, yum." And, that might be an exaggeration, but it wasn't that far off. It was really weird food, but she was also, you could tell she was just tough, and I grew up around a lot of ladies like that. I don't know if you did too, but I think growing up in Mormonism, especially back then, I knew a lot of different ladies who kind of felt like they could pick up and crack all the shells off of a crab and just feed it to you live or something like that, you
Mhm.
know what I mean? She's a tough lady. I'm gonna show some of the older movie that came out like 10 years ago called Julie and Julia, and around that time frame, a lot of stuff came out about how Julia Child probably would've been pretty pissed at that movie because it was just this lady doing a vlog of all that stuff, and it was kinda cheapening a little bit of the work that she had done becoming, like, a top chef, and she was also just wasn't very into self-pity and all that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
And so HBO and modern day writers, current day writers, although this has probably been going along all along in Hollywood, got a hold of the Julia Child story, and they decided to just make it all about, I mean, what would they make it about today?
The Message.
The message. There's just oppression all over in it. There's toxic men, just caricatures of toxic men. I don't have any clips of that, but that could be almost the whole show of some man being toxic to her. Every one of those scenarios. This is like PBS stuff in the '80s.
Mhm.
The men working around were probably all Mr. Rogers and Carnate, you know what I mean? They weren't
Yeah.
like cutthroat business guys. And they're just getting slandered to hell here and back of being, "Oh, they're so toxic." But I bet you they're all the type of men that nowadays, some of them are still alive. Nowadays, they're probably, "Oh, yes, yes, please call me toxic. Yes,
Yeah.
we were absolutely toxic." Kind of like, that, I think there's a clip I have of John DeLynn saying, "I hate myself for being a white man." Mm.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I think just 2 episodes ago we were laughing about that. But
Yeah. So I have in recent years, actually it's always been there, but in recent years I've really started listening to it, and I call it kind of like a revisionist Spidey sense. I start watching the show and something in it just I'm going, what? What's going on here? Like I don't trust this. And one of the reasons I think it ties into Mormonism is because I'm gonna pull a little bit of it up, but I used to listen to a lot of different podcasts that would go over historical things or even feminist viewpoints of the
Mhm.
historical things, the Mormon stuff. And at that time frame, I got a lot of Spidey sense, but I never looked into it. You know what I mean? And I don't have time now to go back and find all the places I had Spidey sense, you know. So nowadays, just when I'm in the moment of seeing it, I try to go, wait, stop, we're looking this up.
Mhm.
And this is one of the moments, the first moments that I hit Spidey sense in the show.
Come in, come in. This child? I just wanted to come by and say hello. Ooh. It was my small idea to have you on the show. Oh, how lovely.
It was her small idea. Did you see the way she's acting? Like, Governor, it was my small idea, Governor, to have you on the show. But one first off, this lady's a fine actress and whatever, but she's got a British accent. It drives me crazy. Like this. I always hear snobs from England always talk about how Americans can't do British accents. Brits cannot do American accents. If you want to watch some feminist take on old West cowboys, watch The Power of the Dog with Benedict Cumberbatch in it and say, I'm an American cowboy. I'm
Mhm.
totally straight. I'm totally straight in the 1820s of the totally macho West. I'm a cowboy. That's what I am. I don't think she's even trying. She just goes straight British, but that's just smack talking to the British and their crappy American accents.
They're all as good as Keanu Reeves doing a British accent.
Exactly. Well, every once in a while you'll find one else that you'll get surprised, like, oh, that guy's British all along. I didn't even know that. But other times you're just like, oh, come on, guys.
Yeah.
Orlando Bloom's accent, I think, is like Elizabethtown. You're a really nice girl. It's good to another one is Jude Law. Jude Law.
They all sound like John Wayne.
Yeah, Jude Law and I Heart Huckabees. Really? This is really what's going on here? Really? And she's not even trying. She just straight British. And I'm halfway through, so I'm like, Julie's not British. Like, you know, I'm just sitting there thinking about it. And of course, I pulled up old clips of her, and she is Californian
Mhm.
and as beefy as that gets. But anyway, a little more of this.
And you named you. I'm Alice Naiman, associate producer. If there's anything I can do for you, please let me know.
Funny you should say that. You wouldn't happen to have a hot plate, would you?
This is that American accent to you.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the first little sense of Spidey sense. Not all of them. This is the whole entire episode on YouTube. There's another moment much later where this lady, it talks about it a little bit later, but
Oh, but at this stage of my life, I don't want to feel invisible. I want to feel relevant. I want to be relevant. Well, now, you have to do it.
I bet you sentences like that Julia Child never said, but that's not even the thing.
Mm.
But Julia Child just was relevant. She
Yeah.
just did cooking. She just did books. She just did the thing. She just, you know.
You
She
wanna
wasn't
know
like,
what
I'm
makes
doing
people-
this for the fame. I'm
Yeah.
going to become famous.
You want to know what makes people relevant and like game changers? They honestly are like honestly doing it.
They're undeniable. She was just undeniable.
Like
And
the
she didn't
Beatles,
have to go say
Led Zeppelin. Like they
she
weren't
wasn't a Kardashian who's
Right.
just going and dreaming of fame.
Right.
You know?
So you came all the way to Boston for that?
Sometimes it's better to have difficult conversations face to face.
Oh, no.
Damn it. They were that disappointed.
They were really hoping you'd consider their offer, especially as they see it, you have nothing else.
So anyway, a couple things here. They're putting on a show because they think they got to get permission from the husband because the husband's not going to give permission.
Mm.
First off, this lady right here, her name was Judith Jones,
Mm.
and she was the editor of the cookbooks. And in one of the later episodes, they completely hint at her being a lesbian,
Mm.
and Spidey sense went off. So the first thing we're talking about, the one back,
What year was
Eight-
this taking place at? Roughly.
oh, her first shows were like 62, 63.
Okay.
But she's not a lesbian. She's not a lesbian at all.
Mhm.
And she had 4 kids. Let me see here. Life and death. Jones lived in Paris after college, where she met her husband and collaborator, Evan Jones, died in 1996. The couple had 4 children, including 2 from Evan's previous marriage. Jones died at 93, August 2nd, 2017. Anyway, back to the other previous thing of the lady's idea, who it was to put it on, what was it, WE, whatever the channel was,
Mhm.
the Boston channel, didn't exist. This doesn't exist. Not a real person. They think it's an amalgamation of people. None of them were black. But this is what I kind of call like award show revisionism. Because
Mhm.
now they have to have quotas and this stuff to try to make the awards. Did you ever watch this movie,
I
Julie and
don't
Julia?
think I saw it all the way.
Looking up the other article is real. Here's one article. It says, "Why Julia on HBO Max is the perfect Women's Histories Month watch." But
It's fake.
it's called "Fictionalizing the French Chef." So this Julie and Julia came out several years ago. It was pretty good, but some people were a little irritated with it because they thought Julia. Well, let it play for a second because I won't show very much of it in case there's a copyright thing.
I'm Julia Child. Bon appetit.
It's better sounding Julia Child. You're like, she even had deeper. I think like a man with she had a deep voice.
Before
Also,
she changed the world, Julia Child was just an American living in France.
Shouldn't I find something to do?
What is it that you really like to do?
see that's playing her husband right there. In this show, all throughout the show, he's played as somebody who completely supports her and everything.
Mm.
In that other show, they show him as a bumbling idiot that they have to work around as if it were kind of like a 1950s husband who doesn't want her to work and they have to, and he gets in the way if he does help and all that sorts of stuff.
Mhm.
Just 10 years ago, they portrayed it a bit differently, but
Eat.
I mean, you're so good at it. Look at you. Now,
I'm
how
throwing
you
in
are.
front of you.
But what does Julia Child have to do with me?
so this is a story about what does Julie Child have to do? It's some girl who just does a vlog. So she says for
Mhm.
365 days, I'm going to do cook one thing of Julie Child. So it's kind of like a modern day, make the whole thing about you type of scenario.
Right.
And some people like say it might get irritating. She did these dishes that Julia worked on and completed and went through all this like crazy French school. And she was one of the first Americans to go through this crazy French school and did the dishes a million times to get them perfected. And she made a vlog and got just as popular with it by just saying, here, I'm going to try each meal every single day.
Mhm.
Here's my experience with this meal. Oh, let me
Right.
talk about me. And she is like a bit more of a narcissist because you want to know what her next book was about?
What's
Her
that?
this lady's next blog, book, whatever, was about
Out of the ocean.
Don't you carry what? What street's in it? What street's in
having an open relationship and cucking and cheating on her husband.
That was what our next book was.
Her very next book was about that. Yep. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, although it's kind of relevant to the times because sure seems to come up a lot lately.
Mhm.
Will Smith and whatnot.
Mhm.
Anyway, that's all fine and dandy. That's their world, whatever that sort of thing is. Let's just listen to actual Julie Child for 1 second. It's like our first one, flipping a potato.
See if that is flippable. Well, we'll have to try it anyway. When you flip anything, you just have to have the courage of your convictions, particularly if it's sort of a loose mass like this. Well, that didn't go very well.
This is what's so good about her, man. She's just raw and
Have the
Yeah.
courage to do it the way I should have. But you can always pick it up and if you're alone in the kitchen, who is going to see? But the only way you learn how to flip things is just to flip them. And so that when that's could have been browned a little more on that side, I shall consider that that's brown and we'll put this in an oven dish like this.
it's so innovative too.
See,
It's one of the first shows that turned
Browned
the
enough
whole
on the
entire
crust
channel
that
in
it
the
would have
industry.
held together.
Yeah.
If I can shake that back in place a little bit.
It's stuff like take Bob Ross. I mean, he was the master at turning a happy little accident into something
Yeah.
positive. You know what I mean?
And people liked it and watched it, and I
But
watched like
it's part of like being the artist, right? It's
Yeah.
part of being like the genuine real deal thing, and that's the thing that's wrong with, you're probably going down this road. What's wrong with these stories, these biopics, that they take a real story, they cram the message into it,
yeah.
and or some message, whatever angle that they want to do. But the problem is it takes all of the realness out of it, you know?
Well, beyond that, I think it just turns into you lose sight of reality or any sort of
Yeah.
sense of reality, and it just becomes propaganda or propagandistic. Here's a little bit. This is an hour and a half. I got this far through it. I was probably going to keep watching more, but it's just her going on David Letterman,
That's it.
Have a nice time.
Very nice time.
and it's just stuff
Oh,
that
this is one hamburger? Well, look at the size of that. You can feed
I mean, you could watch the whole thing and just be entertained to death about it.
Mhm.
We all knew and loved Julia Child. We didn't. If she didn't need to break down the patriarchy or something like that, but
Well, the thing is, if there ever was a strong woman like, say, like her, I don't think that she, yeah, you're right. I think that she just was passionate about what she was doing, and she became an icon just because she was so good at it.
well, so it gets worse. So I'm watching the show and I love Julia Child. I want to see like a real show of Julia Child. And so far we've gotten two kind of duds. I think Meryl Streep did a good job of showing her in her life, but I do not see why it would be a problem just to give us the dang truth about Julia Child and let us watch the truth about Julia Child in the show. That'd be great to watch. But this show's becoming almost just like a completely different thing because obviously it's just about this man suddenly being toxic, and it's just got such a cartoon caricature to it. So that woman that they hint at being a lesbian and was not a lesbian, well, just today or last night they released the fourth. In the fourth, they have Julia go back to college, and she runs into old people from college. One of the women she runs into from college remembers her, but she doesn't remember the woman. And the woman starts talking to her. Then after a minute, she goes, I have somebody, but that somebody's a her. And then it starts going to this thing of saying, do you remember the night we had, Julia? They go into a whole entire thing of saying and hinting that she and Julia had a romp, but Julia doesn't remember it. Julia's like, I don't remember that. And my eyeballs just almost bugged out of my head about how bad that is. So, I mean, that one's just obviously false. Of course, Spidey sense, I look it up. The lady doesn't exist. The situation doesn't exist. That reward show revisionism is in the middle of it again. Although the whole entire show is just so full of revisionism. Just last night, I finished Civilization and Madness by Foucault, another book by Foucault. I don't know why I sit around reading this crap. But the whole entire book, like one of the reasons it's so hard for me to sit and read is because it is just a litany of Spidey sense going off.
Mhm.
You know, just I'm telling you, just a gish gallop of Spidey sense. The whole entire thing is just history, this thing, without any reference. So this is one of the famous critiques of Foucault. One of the famous critiques of Foucault is that his history was crap. It was like a little bit true. It's almost like the Julia Child's movie.
Mhm.
This stuff isn't just Hollywood now and Hollywood doing the message. In fact, a lot of people might say it goes back to Foucault giving him permission to do it because he was the person who also said, well, the history you got is just the same thing. All you ever got was a one-sided view of the history.
Mhm.
This is our bestest buddy, our favoriteest truth teller, John DeLynn, with Lindsay Hansen Park. Lindsay Hansen Park, who I grew up in the same ward with. I was friends with her. I actually talked to her right around the release of this. She even told me all about it. She told me that, you know, she got some pushback, like some people were mad she played with her hair and chewed gum all the way through this. She got some like bull crap comments and all sorts of stuff. I think here she's presenting herself to try to be a very kind of open and objective person. Up to this point, I think I kind of felt she was trying to be that, you know. If you watch this whole episode, you'll see that she's trying to be what we used to believe is measured. Although, just like everything, I start to re-wonder. Let me just play a little bit. So I was talking to her. I supported her through this, but this year of polygamy, it says somewhere in this thing, she kind of got famous a little bit, like, you know, coverage in the news. Now she got famous enough from it that nowadays, if General Conference is covered,
Mhm.
and NPR is around here, whatever we call NPR in Salt Lake, I forget what it is, but Doug Fabrizio will have Lindsay Hansen Park to give us review of what General Conference was. So your General Conference is getting revisionist reviewed
Mhm.
by this person through the same sources, NPR-ish sources. That's the person who's presenting you. That's the person writing the story.
Today we're going to talk about polygamy, and I guess I wanted to begin.
The Year of Polygamy is just a multiple different podcasts talking about the history, and supposedly she found this stuff by these women that wrote this stuff in this situation. And I listened through most of it. I don't think I caught every episode, but I listened through a lot of it. And I'm telling you, even back at this time frame when I wasn't thinking about it, my Spidey sense went off all the time. Like what? Wait, women were talking like that in 18 something? And I know there was some feminist stuff going around. What do they call them? The suffragettes. And that stuff. I mean, that sort of concept that was around all the way back then. But still, there's stuff about, you're telling me this polygamous lady in Price, Utah was saying this? You know what I mean? There was so much, my Spidey sense was going off. My Spidey sense went off a lot. And I never stopped and looked into it. And since I've gotten better at looking, like now we watch these TV shows and I stop and I look. But it happens all the time too. I saw on TikTok, I mentioned it before, but I saw somebody talking about, we have Suicide Peak in Utah, and the way Suicide Peak came around was Mormons went and chased a lady, and she jumped and committed suicide off the top of it because they were trying to circle and kill a Native American woman. And I'm just like, no, you know. And
That's the first time I was wondered what was the behind the name behind
you know, stuff. Maybe there's a legend of that, but I tried to look it up. So far as right now, it sounds like a big Hollywood story to me. You know, and there's a bunch of them going around. I just learned some stuff about Battle Creek. There's a whole story around Battle Creek, which seems to have truth to it. Like they did go and encounter some thieving Native Americans at that point, and killed a couple of them because they'd supposedly stolen some stuff. And then some people bring up some stuff. Well, they had word that they hadn't actually stolen or something like that, or that they'd returned the stuff that they'd stolen.
Yeah, the thing that I think is so funny, it's like, you know, this is where I can see people when you're probably pointing this out too. I mean, you are pointing this out, but like from leaving the church and be like, yeah, well, all those stories about the 3 Nephites and stuff, of like them or the Nephites being, there was a girl in the park and she was going to get murdered or something like that. But then the guy looked at it and there was like three big Nephite dudes standing next to her. I think they made that joke in the singles ward.
Yeah.
And they were hitting that joke in singles ward. And it's like, you know, you guys leave and then you get to go start your own new ones, huh?
Exactly. You're hitting the nail on the head. You're hitting what I'm saying is, in the ex-Mormon world, there was a while where like maybe flip where I thought, well, we're in the world of truthiness now. And you don't realize that you actually entered into the Foucauldian world. You actually entered into the Hollywood world. You know, you entered into a world, and I'm not saying they're 100% wrong. I saw this other story about a woman. She'd been a slave. She got taken to California. Her slaver person became Mormon, which I think they also became Mormon in that situation. And then in California, she became some important person. The way people framed it on the ex-Mormon side is they said, this Mormon guy. And so I looked into the story. I looked at the whole details. I'm regurgitating it poorly here. That's why I say, go look into it. You hear your Spidey sense go off. The whole thing was the guy got converted into Mormonism. And he wasn't a Mormon who brought her over for the Mormon reasons. He was converted to Mormonism. And when he was converted to Mormonism by Brigham Young, the racist that everybody says he is, maybe there's some proof or cases to that, Brigham Young told him he didn't want that slavery stuff coming over to California with him. Brigham Young said, you gotta knock this off if you want to come be a part of this.
Yeah.
And that was left out. That was left out of their truth or untruth or deconstructivist narrative. And I mean, right now you just have to take my word for that. That's how they framed it, and that's the truth of the matter. You can look up the lady. It's probably not that hard to find. There's a whole Wikipedia article on her. But like the way an ex-Mormon will frame it can be just as full of Hollywood narrative as anything.
Yeah.
By just saying, you know, we've talked a little bit about your childhood and experiences in the church. This time, just talk about anything in your childhood or upbringing that you think might have informed your ultimate interest in wanting to do a podcast like this.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So I grew up LDS. I think Mormon women have a really unique position with the polygamy issue. And that is because culturally and socially, we don't support the idea of polygamy. In fact, I think we are supported in monogamy. We have a really like hyper monogamous church, especially right now. And so I grew up with that kind of being really uncomfortable with polygamy, knowing about it, but not having a support system. Whereas other Mormon fundamentalists, depends on the different groups, have a whole culture that supports polygamy. Some people will, parents will start the children at a young age to be steered away from monogamy. Some people teach their kids not to watch Hollywood films because it, supports a false love story of monogamy that might be difficult. So as a Mormon woman, I grew up in a culture that polygamy was the weird thing that other people did. They took too far, that the pioneers did, but it's over now. And so that's kind of how I grew up. So I grew up really uncomfortable, comfortable with polygamy until I got married. And this, I think, is a pretty common thing. I had a husband, and the thought of sharing him made me deeply, deeply uncomfortable.
This gets so weird. I hate these actual parts. I hate kind of throwing Lindsay under the bus for it, because I mean, my life and history hasn't been perfect in the love realm or any sort of thing like that. But it's strange that well, I'll show you.
And he would joke about it, and other people would sometimes joke about it. And I was surprised at my reaction, how strong it was. Like, I could laugh on the surface because I didn't want to be the weird one that can't laugh at things like that. But I was deeply wounded by the jokes. And so I was always uncomfortable with it. And it was,
So at some point, we'll talk about your current beliefs now, but at some point, totally believing Orthodox Mormon, and you knew, what did you think? You probably knew at some point that Joseph or Brigham had practiced polygamy, but how did you think that was relevant to you?
I actually didn't know Joseph practiced polygamy. I was under the assumption that Brigham Young was a polygamous prophet, and that my ancestors did it. And that's about as far as I thought about it.
Well, did you feel threatened? Did you think?
Because I knew somewhere, and I don't know that it was ever explicitly stated, but I've heard it explicitly stated to some people, that I would have to live it eventually. Like, the good Mormons will have to live it someday. And of course, we're told with caveat, like, oh, well, you'll get to choose. And, Heavenly Father will not make you unhappy. So if it makes you unhappy, you don't have to do it. And I just really found so many problems with that sort of rationale. For example, I began to fear it and loathe it so much that it became like, I just knew it was a core part of my identity. And so the idea of like, you'll change and things are different in heaven, I thought, well, then I won't even be me. So what's the point? Right. So that was one of the issues.
So she's saying she can't see how she would see people being able to love multiple people in an afterlife or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
She can't see it, but let's just listen a little more.
That I had with it. And another issue was that, God won't make you do that. And I was like, well, cool. So God won't make me do that. So like, I'm going to hell then? Like, thanks, God. Really good, solid of you, So it never really sat well with me. And anytime I tried to ask people about it, you had a variation of answers. And it mostly ended up with, that's not something you're supposed to worry about right now.
Okay. So that was kind of how polygamy loomed like a dark cloud over you for a few years?
Yeah, for a long time. I've talked about this quite openly on other podcasts, but I actually was engaged to someone other than my husband when I got married. And so I did the dumb LDS thing where you marry really young and really fast. And so I married my husband still in love with someone else. And so I felt like a sinner thinking about this other person who I had ended it really poorly. And he was really upset at me, and I never had time to heal from that. And so I felt like a sinner thinking about this other person.
Yeah, well, she did a whole on Mormon Expression had a whole separate podcast. It was called like not Mormon Stories. I can't remember what Mormon Expression Stories, where people would go on and talk about their whole entire exit, because there were so many different exit stories, and they got tired of people giving kind of the same exit stories. They made a whole separate podcast that nobody would listen to. That was just kind of each person going in and giving their 2-hour long exit story. And in that exit story, she talks about how she was and still was in love with this other guy all throughout her marriage. She's now divorced this time later. But to me, it's just it seems a bit of a cognitive dissonance that you're so upset and not able to figure out like how there's these multiple loves or whatever in a polygamous marriage. And then at the same time, you're expressing that you're living it in a way, sort of, you're in love with
later.
Yeah. It didn't take that long to get into that, but that's a whole other theme. I mean, if there's like a whole realm, like people can try to do what they want. What's the quote we always give from Arrested Development? We just recently seen all the stuff with Will Smith coming out, and should I just look
Tobias
it up?
and Lindsay?
Yeah. Being ex-Mormon, being around people trying to figure this sort of stuff out. I know a lot of people, I've told you about it, just even people in my life, myself, you figure out real quick that this stuff doesn't work,
Well, here's the thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming this is kind of a major reason people leave the church.
So they'll get mad at you if they say that, and there's obviously some who don't. There's some who just want to stay, but for sure.
The thing is you got to look at it like when we grew up, maybe not having all of the truth like painted. But I think that it's like that with history in general, but I could understand why there's a lot of like oral traditions that are passed down. And then the thing is what happens, the internet comes along, and now we're able to kind of research a lot of stuff. I'm kind of glad for it. Like, as a practicing member of the church, I'm kind of glad for it, because I'm glad that it puts to bed like stuff that's not legit. You know what I mean? Like, I do believe in a lot of like the miraculous stories that were actually written down, you know, and a lot of that stuff. Maybe I'm treading into territory here where some of our listeners might think that I'm I don't know, a dunce about this stuff, but you know, it's just it's a two-way street. That's all I'm saying.
What do you mean, like believe in some stories that might not have like total like backing truth to it, or
Well, it wasn't like revisionist stuff within the church, but it was like when there ended up becoming tall tales, right? Maybe from the perspective of people wanting to have like more faith in something. And so some stories end up getting embellished, you know?
Yeah, but if I think if you went and saw any one of those things, if we talked about, I mean, people talk about there's that story of the two young guys who carried all the people across the water and froze
yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
And I can't remember for sure, but I think
Martin
there
Hancock
might
or
not
something.
be. Yeah, I don't know if it's 100% true or not. It might be true. I might be wrong about that. But if you found out this wasn't true, you're not gonna like fall and squirm on the ground. You know, it's like, oh, I thought that was true.
A lot of times you go back and you find the original document, you know, where like, and there's just a couple things. I mean, look what happened with like the Joseph Smith, you know, the first vision, you know, it comes out that, oh, we're going to shed a little bit more light because he wrote down some different things, you know? And like, my thing is like, you know, honestly, the differences don't bug me. It just doesn't bother me. I don't let it get to me. And maybe it's because with a lot of this stuff too, it's like, you know, she's kind of pointing out some things like, oh, everybody's going to have to participate in polygamy. Well, I don't know where it says that. I mean, maybe somebody said it along the line somewhere, but like my thing is that I just am like, you know what? I'm just going to stick to the basics of the gospel. I don't know. I just kind of stick to the basics, man. It's like, I don't
Well, I
get
mean,
into that.
I
that
think
stuff.
that whole entire thing is talking about like afterlife stuff that I think that's what she's saying is like ultimately some people talk about maybe they'll bring back the mandate or something like that. But I think that's also talking about like after this life, people are going to be sealed to more people or stuff like that. I think
Yeah.
that's what that's referring to. And that's also why I think it's weird when
Well-
you're also somebody who can understand that in this life.
Well, maybe I'll get into this and play this clip. We've kept everybody waiting.
Well, this is exciting.
Finally, we can be a normal couple.
Nice to be back in a queen. That's too much
I
pressure.
can't do this.
So Lindsay and Tobias finally took a hard look at their relationship.
You know, Lindsay, as a therapist, I have advised a number of couples to explore an open relationship where the couple remains emotionally committed, but free to explore extramarital encounters.
Well, did it work for those people?
No, it never does. I mean, these people somehow delude themselves into thinking it might, but but it might work for us.
Well, we can give it a shot.
Great. We'll hammer out the details later. Right now, we've got a daughter to tell. You people are having a memory on her way.
There's so much. I mean,
dude,
I hate to caricature too badly the ex-Mormon world, but that to me, if there was a caricature of the ex-Mormon world, and
it just might work for us.
we've got a daughter. I've seen it, and I'm very, very aware that I don't think that people are as aware as Tobias beforehand that it blows up in people's faces. I've been around long enough, and I've seen a lot of the people land on that same conclusion, and I've seen it blow up. We even know a few people now. I know a few people now. It's currently blowing up on people who I didn't think it would blow up on.
Yeah, like Will Smith.
Yep, that's the guy I know.
Oh, so I was gonna throw this in. Here's me getting deep. This is Kevan doctrine, okay, or my interpretation of doctrine. Okay, so with this whole sealing thing, I don't know if I have talked about this on here or not, but my wife and I, we both were previously married. She was widowed, sealed to her first husband. I was sealed to my first wife. When we got married, we actually just got married civilly when we got married. And my bishop, amazing guy. I ended up back in my home ward growing up. And when I moved back to Murray, and my bishop was somebody that I was pretty tight with. He was my first scout leader, my Blazer scout leader. I earned my first merit badge over at his house. He showed me how to fix a leaky faucet and the home repairs. Merit badge. Anyway, so he ends up marrying us, and we kind of had those questions. It's like, well, what about this? What about like this whole ceiling thing? And he kind of put to bed to me, and actually gave one of the best answers that have kind of put the whole thing to rest between me and my wife. And the thing about it is the whole ceiling thing, if you think about it from like maybe how God thinks about it all that matters is that we end up getting sealed all the way back to Adam and Eve, to God. So the thing that matters most is the ceiling ends up getting all the way back to Adam and Eve, right? To God, so that we can be sealed all the way down through the generations. And so when you think about it, it's like you think about in the eternal like afterlife, what individuals will be like. Okay, if we're all kind of in our prime, then I just look at it as like, will my kids be kind of like the same state of age like I am? I don't know. We get this whole idea of having an eternal family. I'm going to have little kids for eternity. That type of image has always been kind of, I think, the image that comes to mind. So anyway, as far as like the ceiling goes, like the fact that me and my ex-wife were sealed together and we're sealed to our kids, and me and my wife was sealed to her husband and all that stuff. In the end, I think my opinion is after all this is over, we'll still have our agency. Maybe you don't want to be married eternally to somebody that you tried out for life. You know what I mean? There's a lot of stuff that happens in life,
This is one of the other podcasts that was floating past my brain, and it'll come back around again, but I didn't grab it out of the air at the moment. I've talked a little bit about it before. It's just that when you leave religion or become like an atheist, it really does change the dials in your brain, to the sense of you're no longer thinking of like this eternal thing. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. After time, I've started seeing or realizing, I've seen people point to people idolizing their own rationality, but also there's this level of people stop, and you almost are forced to become a materialist and think that this world, maybe you hand it to them, this world is all that matters. So getting what you can get in this world and getting your money that you can get in this world, and your brain and your own rationality is all you can idolize. And then maybe you can fix it and do everything because you're in charge of all this stuff and nobody else is going to fix it. There's nobody above you to fix it. But one of the other levels I've always thought about is eternity. And thinking of eternity actually being real really changes the dials on your brain. It really changes the dials on your brain. Like, really, eternity. What is eternity? If eternity is real, you like hear people say they'll get upset, like in the Mormon world, Hitler might go to the celestial kingdom, which is a beautiful heaven-like kingdom, right? And they'll get upset about that. Whoa, no, he should be burning, and he needs the retribution or something like that. But if you really think about eternity, like 800 billion years from now, let's say that really happens. We're sitting in a lounge room with a bunch of people, and one of the guys says, "Yeah, my name is Adolf Hitler." And 800 billion years from now, you'll be like, Hitler. I know that name, like, oh, I know that name. I know that name. Hitler. Wait a minute,
It's like on Rat Race, the movie Rat Race, when he's
like,
in the
weren't
car
you
and
the
he's
guy?
like, hey,
Weren't you the guy?
did you catch the
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the guy that, yeah, that was me. I was stupid. I mean, a lot of these
You let
people
him
got to
go.
this paradise a bit earlier because of me, and oh, my bad. And like, really, even if you think of like some sort of extreme kind of torturous pain or something like that, if it's only 10 years, 80 years, 100 years, whatever, your brain should really process that as compared to eternity of bliss. It really changes. And some people might say that's the evilness of it, is that you should stop and think about how important every single material moment of hunger or pain or strife is in this life. But I think that's one of the major disconnects is how those dials are turned in the brain of somebody who thinks this is all there is, and somebody who thinks, no, this goes forever. Obviously, if this goes forever and ever, the whole entire love and polygamy thing, it's going to get weird. That's all there is to it. If there's 800 billion years and then more, and you're not even started,
Yeah.
it's Like, so to sit around and pretend that you got to figure it out. I think that's just kind of like one of the deals. Maybe there is like an eternity, but maybe there isn't. And that's kind of one of the eternal struggles. But I think if you are an atheist and you just don't believe in all that stuff, there's got to be a level where you stop and believe that the other people do believe that stuff. And so you got to chill and back off of it and realize that they're working with thinking that the reality of the situation we're in goes much, much longer than you do. And and it's even kind of strange that you forget that just because you announce, well, I'm an atheist and now all that matters is what I get in this life.
And it's interesting too to even kind of meet in the middle with like a Jordan Peterson perspective, where he'll kind of point out like, well, listen, I don't know if eternity really is there, but what you do will end up visiting your kids and your grandkids and your progenitors seven generations down the line, just like, how it's written in the Bible. The Bible is the story of what happens. You know what I mean? So if you do something stupid, it can end up affecting future generations for how many generations, who knows? Something you do could end up completely changing the world for thousands of years. I don't know.
Yeah. This has a paywall, obviously, as you can see here, but I think it's a funny title. Fictionalizing the French Chef. The 8-part series from HBO Max adds a dash of questionable reality to the culinary icon story. Back to that whole concept. So I've been watching.
Sorry for the
no, that's
the walk in the weeds.
That's the good part about you, and that's the part that doesn't exist in this other side. Is when I'm starting to criticize something of this, you immediately internalize the criticism and start saying, like, oh, maybe there's something about me I should think about here, which should be the human reaction to most humans, but it's not. These guys will just do it. And that's almost kind of what I've been trying to scream at the ex-Mormon community of, like, stop and step back. You're so keyed into this thing of taking it down and that you're a new atheist and that you totally view the world differently. Now you've graduated into rationality. You're a PhD in rationality now because you left Mormonism. You're just in another thing. I remember a couple years ago that a Christian Bale movie came out of Christian Bale doing Dick Cheney. Yeah, it's probably impressive watching him do Dick Cheney or whatever. And one of my other friends, Davey, goes, you want to go catch this movie? And by that point, I was already starting to, my Spidey senses were just blown out, And I was like, no, I don't want to watch that movie. Well, why don't you want to watch that movie? I'm like, do I want to watch a Hillary Clinton movie put on by PragerU, right? If PragerU was putting on a movie and it is exactly that thing. All of Hollywood, they have such a specific bias that, like,
don't think they're gonna come down the pike from the Daily Wire movies at some point.
Oh, it might start happening, but people have already had the way that you could point to it. Is like, you can look at Kirk Cameron Christian movies, and even the Daily Wire is critical of those movies, like saying they're just unwatchable and insufferable. But they even just have like a storyline. Think if Kirk Cameron or the Daily Wire really was doing what Hollywood's been doing for 100 years, which is, well, let's do the Mormon version of the Julia Child story. And the Mormon version is, well, she always knew there was a God and something greater, and she felt something was this. And oh, wait, she had this friend in college, and that friend in college was a Mormon. And that friend started talking to her about the Book of Mormons, and she's like, yeah, this really makes sense. This really makes sense to me. And then all this other time later in life, that friend appeared again and said, you remember that time you felt the spirit of the Book of Mormon? I do. And then they get back to cooking or something like that. There'd be this, like,
I just can't give up me Merlot.
Yeah. And then stuff like that would just be completely weaseled in that just never happened and didn't have anything to do with anything. Or let's make sure a Mormon's here, like this lady who edited her book. Let's say, my father is a Mormon and he taught me Mormon precepts, and that's why I think you are good, Julia. And that line would be weaseled in, that would be the real opposite world if we were seeing it inside of other narratives. And they've been doing this crap forever. And I never watched that Dick Cheney movie because I got sick of going through that sorts of stuff. And they have better actors and better production so far. So there might be some, like, reason to check out, wow, Christian Bale's doing the Dick Cheney. That's interesting to watch or something like that. Right now, PragerU did a Hillary Clinton. The Hillary Clinton would just be terrible. You know what I mean? Like, it wouldn't be, they probably wouldn't get some, like, great actor to do it, but the content would be just as laughably unwatchable because it's just like, you're just watching straight propaganda. You're not Nobody's giving you the real story. You're not going to get the real story. But Foucault will say there is no real story in there. So that's going on in a million other places. But they've got this. I'll show it to you again. There's this show on Hulu Plus called The Girl from Plainview. You heard about this? So this is a girl. You might have heard about it in the news. She, over the text messages, kind of convinced a boy to commit suicide for her own attention. This is a real story. So it's a real story and it's good and all that stuff. But then all of a sudden in the middle of it, well, let's see if your Spidey sense goes off here.
Never met. What do you think dying is like?
Just like floating on water.
Not it. I don't know if it's in the trailer. Let me see if it's in the trailer because there was a whole big long episode on it today. There's suddenly this friend in it, and they just start hinting that she's a secret lesbian, and that's why she did all this stuff. And her friend's a lesbian. I thought it was a scene because there's like a scene of them lying on the ground that they keep going back to again and again. And so they start hinting, and I think one of the reasons they do it is because they have to say, the only reason a woman would do something this horribly bad to a boy is because she's having to bury her secret lesbianism or something like that. So, of course, my Spidey sense goes off. I look it up. Fictionalized character doesn't exist. A character that's in there to meet the quotas because you can't get an award without fitting out in the quota nowadays. So then there's this other show going on right now called The Dropout. That's about Elizabeth Holmes. Do you know about Elizabeth Holmes?
Remind me.
She is I'd call it kind of a con artist, the one who faked kind of being like Steve Jobs. She started faking being like Steve Jobs in Silicon Valley. And
Oh yeah,
a
yeah.
bunch of
No,
people. And
actually I just watched it.
you watched the show.
Dude, okay. I watched this, and I watched that, and then I watched the other one that
These are okay shows.
and I'm going to tell you that. But yeah, okay, yeah, I know.
They're
It's
okay shows, but they slip in stuff, and there's part of like they can't.
The one where she conned everybody because she was doing some like mail your blood, stuff.
Because they have their certain ideology, they have to do some stuff of trying to rescue terrible people. Like the girl in the Plainview. Oh, it's because she's been forced to bury her lesbianism. And in this situation, it's because of the toxic masculine.
I didn't catch it in here, but go ahead and.
Well, she doesn't. This is just a bunch of different stuff, but there's scenes where. Have you finished it yet?
I was only half watching. My wife was watching it.
Oh,
She,
okay.
actually,
So
she got irritated by it, so she didn't.
Well, it's a good show because it's real stuff that happened. But of course, they mix in all their stuff, and then of course there'll be all these themes through it. Like the people who are trying to expose her will say, "Man, Donald Trump said John McCain was a loser and nobody cared." Like they'll just have like these one-offs like that. Like,
Yeah.
Although that's the way those journalists probably do talk in their spare time. But I want to.
World works in certain ways until a new great idea comes along and changes everything. What if you could test your flood in your own home? And what if it wasn't a whole file, but just a drop? I'm going to drop out to Stanford. This machine is going to change the world.
I don't know if you ever watched her, but like she has this like really fake deep voice, and it's just creepy. She's like, I'm Elizabeth Holmes, and I'm just
The real Elizabeth Holmes.
The real Elizabeth.
Yeah,
Holmes. She does it in this. She does it in this. She moves into the deeper voice, and she's kind of trying to put off like the Steve Jobs autism vibe to give herself credence and credibility. Anyway, I wanted to show you one scene. I don't know if you'll be able to see it because I've actually got it up on my screen, but I bet you'd love this little clip. Holy crap! It's so stupid. Probably true. It was probably like a truer scene too, though. Watch this. This is the moment that this guy finds out the government's cracking down on her. I just fell in love with federal bureaucracy, and I don't care who knows. But that's just a one-off. There's little moments like that all through these things that they just slip in these stupid things all the time. But there's an episode in this where they talk about pee hacking. I'm going to pivot to the last. Did you see the episode about pee hacking?
No, but you and I have talked about it a bit.
I brought it up pretty recently on the Jonathan Streeter podcast that we're doing about some stuff, but we didn't go into it very deeply.
You'll have to let me throw in the Princess Diana one.
Yeah, well, I'll bring it up now.
Right now?
Yeah, because I'm going to pivot into the medical world.
So this has been my last week, spring break, and we went down to St. George, and night. My wife's been watching, some shows, so we watched that one, and then we watched another one. I'll show you. Let's see.
I'm gonna get to the p hacking that's in the show here just in a second. But yeah, Kevin's gonna.
Okay.
He's had Spidey sense go off too.
Yes, my Spidey sense went off this week. So so we watched this. Okay, and this is Spencer. Came out last year. Kristen Stewart. She actually learned how to act a little bit. So she did. I didn't think that she did absolutely terrible job of Princess Di, but I don't know. I didn't follow Princess Di all that closely or anything like that, but I thought she did fine. But there's a big part, and I'm gonna throw a spoiler out here. So if you haven't seen it, and if you really care all that much, you might want to stop now and go watch it. But anyway, so there's kind of a big pivotal point in this story where she is basically, she doesn't have a whole lot of anybody that she can really trust because she's married into the royal family, right? And but she has this maid that she's become really good friends with, and they became pretty close, and she was getting ready to bail out on was it Prince Charles, whoever her husband was.
Yeah.
And there's this scene where they're just sitting there and talking, and all of a sudden her maid tells her, well, if you must know the truth, I've been in love with you for a long time. And I was really paying attention to this whole movie. My wife was watching it and stuff, and I was just kind of like, whatever. But all of a sudden I
Spidey goes on.
I was like front and center. I was like, and I looked over to my wife, and I'm like, I bet you that never really happened.
Yeah.
So I was curious, and I decided to look into it a little bit more. And what do you think, Chris? Do you think I was right?
My Spidey sense is going off that no.
Well, let's look and see what Cosmopolitan says about it. It says the Maggie character seems not to necessarily be based on a real person, but was based on a job that did exist within the royal family. Appleby was married to a man. For what it's worth, there is no proof that any of Diana's maids ever confessed that they loved her. There's no proof. Again, this is a movie. This movie is a work of fiction. It's a biopic, but also not really. So I just like they are running defense here. So while it's nice twist at the end of the movie, there is no proof it really happened. Oh well.
No proof. It's worse than no proof.
Oh well.
You invented it out of your arse. There's no chance it happened.
Okay. I guess I didn't pay attention to and didn't get through the dropout, but to catch,
No, well, so I was just pointing that, but I was going to get to the P hacking that they have around dropout, because P hacking is actually a pivot into something else. But these quotas that it was always there. They always did this stuff. They always put revisionist kind of sneaky things into the movies, the message and all that stuff. But it's been even worse since it's become a quota to get an award. Like that happened sometime like last year, 2 years ago, and now it'll just be stuffed in there, and it gets stuffed in there so much that I'm watching a Julia Child show, and beyond just kind of it generally looking a little bit like Julia Child, I don't know that an ounce of any of it is actual Julia Childness. It's like the full postmodern condition of watching a complete simulacra of the situation. But Foucault would say that's all you were ever watching. Even the other version was just the straight version of that concept. So quota stuff, just to look here, it's not just crapping on the reality of TV shows that you're watching. Maybe in Hollywood it was always hyper real. Maybe Braveheart was hyper real. All these things weren't exactly true, but they've always, since Foucault, and they have this thing called a new historicism. And that new historicism is taking license to feel like you could write in how people must have felt about situations, and whatever sort of activists can do that. So then you have all these different ideas in academia that come up that they call things like epistemic justice, or it'll be epistemic justice will be how do you know things, or how do you know about history and stuff like that. So then you have, let's start with a little bit of 1619 Project stuff, which 1619 Project stuff suffers from Hollywood writing. And the Nicole Hannah-Jones, the person who wrote about it, even bragged on Twitter, I could probably pull it up and plop it in here, that she never once said it was an accurate portrayal of history. And here's John McWhorter talking about
I think that my take on the 1619 controversy is perhaps somewhat more local, but the whole episode has worried. And it's probably because of issues historiographical, such as Dr. Harris has mentioned, but there's been more involved as far as I'm concerned. And so it seems to me that we can't forget that the fundamental claim of the 1619 Project is that the Revolutionary War was fought over slavery. That's the claim. And the issue is that true? And the reason that it's important to stress that is because, for example, it's not that Nicole Hannah-Jones was responsible for showing that anyone who had anything to say about the Revolutionary War was concerned with slavery. The issue is whether it was a dominant issue, and that's what he says. And we have to face an inconvenient fact, which is that without that particular claim, of course, the 1619 Project has various presentations, but without that particular claim, it wouldn't have the attention that it does. It wouldn't be shaping our historiographical discussion in any way. And as much as I hate to say it, Nicole Hannah-Jones wouldn't have gotten the Pulitzer without that earth-shattering claim. Earth-shattering, because if that's true, then we really should revise what we think of as the American Project. And I have to say, the fact that they phrased it as imagine if, to be taken as the very deft and effective rhetorical device that it was. But we can't say that because she phrased it as imagine that she isn't responsible for the statement. And here's why. She said imagine, and a great many, frankly, rather august people said that no, the Revolutionary War was not fought over the slavery question. Now, suppose people had simply said yes, we should begin our country's history at 1619 because of what Nicole Hannah-Jones said, and think of 1776 as just one rather complex year. She just said no. I always said just imagine. No, let's face it. So this is the issue. When people in positions of authority say that it's okay for a Black scholar to make a claim as nervy as that one and say that our founding should be placed at 1619 when Africans were brought up onto the beach, rather than to enshrine 1776 as the philosophically interesting and unprecedented phenomenon that it was, to allow that she can say that and not be corrected, that when she's corrected in the public square, it's okay for her to just say in various ways that criticism comes from racism, and for her to be let pass with that statement is racist. I know that a lot of people think they're demonstrating their anti-racism by not holding her responsible, but instead it creates a different kind of racism. I doubt she perceives it, but I do, and it disgusts me.
That's just in that realm. Here, I got the quick receipts on.
It's going to end up in like what happens here is this stuff ends up in like the ultimate backfire in the end. It's like because reality bats last.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, everybody comes to find out what was really going on. Maybe they're trying to get away with it because they've got tech in their pockets saying, oh, you know what, we're going to shut speech down in sneaky ways, like shadow banning or whatever, algorithming. You know?
Yeah. So they call it justice. They call it data justice. They call it research justice. They call it epistemic justice. And these are all their ideological terms for doing this Hollywood style revisionism. And there was some time frame where she was trying to say, I didn't argue that was the founding. And then this is her Twitter feed, Ida B. Wells, which is referencing some old freedom fighter. She uses that person's name. But this is where, you know, one of the things that people pulled up say, no, look at your own receipts. And here's her saying, the 1619 Project explicitly denies objectivity. We state in the intro that this was a reframing of history and sought to center Black contributions to the narrative. This has been my primary problem with this so-called criticism.
We were just trying to rewrite history.
Yeah, so they openly admit it. That probably covers enough of 1619. I had another video of it, but that covers it enough. So then the reason I mentioned the Elizabeth Holmes one, and I think it's so funny, there's this other Netflix movie called I Care a Lot. And it's about this lady who exploits old women for their money and like imprisons them in old folk homes and then ransacks all their money. And because of the message, they can't just have the woman be an evil person. They have
they have to have a be like male behind her, like
or they try to even play the thing of like she's a woman boss. She is such a good woman boss. Like they still she's a woman boss
to justify it.
At completely ruining people's lives. And so then there'll be another moment, of course, she's a lesbian. And of course, she's like, oh, well, I only have to do this because I was a lesbian and life was hard on me or something like that. Mm-hmm. But I'm still a badass. I'm still good at it. And then, of course, there's some man who's worse or something like that. And you watch all these shows and you realize they just get so confused. They do not know how to sort themselves out of these stories. Mm-hmm. If you watch this Elizabeth Holmes story, the whole Elizabeth Holmes story happened because of white female privilege. That's how it happened. A bunch of rich old men wanted to believe that this young lady could do this outrageous thing. And they wanted to feed the money and they wanted to give it to her and all that stuff. The show mentions a little bit. They say, oh, it's because she's a pretty white girl. So they'll make the the caveat for that, right? But I promise you, the same people would just turn over hills if they could find the same thing, like an Ida B. Wells, like a Nicole Hannah Jones to give to, and start acting like, oh my gosh, we found the Nicole Hannah Jones, or of the Steve Jobs of that world. They would just flip if they could find that. But Pajal's talked about it a lot, and a lot of the different things, like they don't know how to sort out the stories. They don't know how to write the stories with the message because everything's flipped upside down. They don't know how to make it sense. They don't know how to have a bad guy. They don't know how to sort the situation out. That's one of the interesting things of the Elizabeth Holmes stories, just seeing them try to sort out these stories and still get the messages across and still say the thing of like, I love government bureaucracy and all those sorts of stuff. Or man, how could people judge Elizabeth Holmes if there's a Donald Trump in the world? People believe in Donald Trump. You know, they make sure to get all those things in there. In one of the episodes, they talk about p hacking, and they faked their data with how well their instruments and their machines worked and tested people's blood by it's basically just removing the data that you didn't like, or altering something. You alter something because, oh, that didn't fit into my desires of what I wanted of the outcome. And this is a woman who was a whistleblower on that happening at universities here a while back. I'll let her tell a story and I'll talk a little bit more about it after. She's got like 4 minutes on this one.
Harassment. So that theory would expect to find that probably homosexual men and bisexual men would be the most likely to experience harassment as outward men. So when we first ran the results, we had asked my advisor in the study had asked participants to rate themselves on a scale of 1 from completely homosexual to 5, which is completely heterosexual, and 2s were mostly homosexual, or 4, 2s and 4s were mostly heterosexual and mostly homosexual, and then 3s were bisexual. So you had the polls, the 1 and 5, the 2s and 4s sort of matched, and then 3s.
Yeah.
Does that make
There's
sense?
that waffling zone, and then the bi zone,
Okay.
and then the straight and gay zone.
Totally. Good way of putting it. Yeah. Which is weird because that's not actually the way that it's characterized on the Kinsey scale. Like that scale is from 0 to 6. And it has different varying levels of like homosexuality, bisexuality, etc.
I don't think the Kinsey scale is any good either. There's a whole lot of whack-the-doodle history about Kinsey, maybe way out in the future, but
Then it has an asexual zone apart from the scale. So it was weird. I'm not quite sure where he found this rating scale or if he just devised it himself. But anyway, when we were doing the analysis, we ran it one way, and my advisor didn't find the result he wanted. So instead, he had me drop people who listed themselves as 2s or 4s in with either 1s and 5s, or lumped together with 3s until he found the result that he wanted.
And is this what is called
until he found the result that he wanted?
P hacking? Okay, which is there's many jokes to be made about that phrase, but could you define it? Because this pops up, and I know that this is actually a bigger issue than just what you've experienced. This is kind of correct me if I'm wrong, it's part of the replication crisis, or is the p hacking something distinct from that?
So p-hacking is distinct from the replicability crisis, but p-hacking absolutely has a part to play in the replicability crisis, as we know, and we can sort of discuss both things if you want to define them. But p-hacking, the best way I can think of to describe it is basically splicing and recategorizing data and then running a bunch of analyses until you get the result you want, and then selectively reporting only those findings, totally obscuring anything else that you found. So basically, you're running a bunch of stuff, throw everything to the wall, see what sticks, only report the stuff that sticks, and pretend that that was the first thing that you did, that you had found that.
And as opposed to the replicability crisis, I have to sound out the consonants every time because I mess it up.
So replicability, I guess, the best way to describe it is the extent to which findings can generalize over time or throughout different contexts. So in this replicability crisis, which has really hit the field of social psychology pretty hard, we're finding that a lot of these sort of cornerstone findings and studies don't replicate when we do them again. So there's either like a direct replication where you look at the methods of a study and you repeat everything that they said that they did. So you repeat it just completely. Or there are conceptual replications where you try to find the same general finding, but you don't use the exact methods that the original paper used.
Part of the replicability process or problem that's out there is there's just not enough time or money in the world to even start to try to redo so-called claimed psychological or psychology experiments. And beyond that, you can't even do half of them nowadays anymore because they'll say using a human guinea pig is a breach of ethics.
Okay.
And most of these are direct replications.
And with regards to the field of social psychology, why do you think that this has particularly hit that hard? Or what is it about social psychology that has allowed this methodology, this corrupt methodology to perpetuate? Is it because it's so complex, because it's always changing, because there's so many factors, so much research, and because the psychology of the social psychologist is always imprinting on the data?
Yeah, that
So she gives an answer just kind of going into maybe things change over time, maybe humans change over time. A lot of their problems were a lot of the testing through history was done on first year college students, and that's who you're asking for your ideas on psychology and stuff like that. But there's also the realm of it that nowadays there's people who truly, like that person she's blowing the whistle on, believe in data justice. They believe that they should be hacking the peas. I worry about this because so much that we know about statistics, like we know that people have gone and looked at
This is how you hack science.
police statistics, and those police statistics have been trouble for activists. And then Jordan Peterson's caught hell, just like James Damore caught hell, because a lot of the psychology statistics were problems for them. Big 5 personality trait statistics, they're problems for them. How much stuff is related to, for example, like the P. So people say with the P hacking is if you change like the numbers and all that stuff, what P ultimately is saying is there, are we seeing a difference here? Are we seeing something that's not just the norm? Are we? So the P hacking is, do these 5 personality traits exist? And we can tell if we interview and go through enough different people, testing them in rigorous ways, we can sort out that there's 5 seemingly types of personalities that can be measured, consistently measured. Whenever you're doing any sort of testing, you need to look at construct reliability, which is it will be consistent each time they get tested. It'll come out accurate to how it was last time. And validity is like, does this actually map into the world? Does it actually play out like you're thinking it plays out? There's a lot of difficulty in proving that stuff over time, but the P means, so we found something like agreeableness is one of the big 5 personality, and there's disagreeableness and agreeableness. And we'll be able to find, that there is a significant difference between, say, this group of men over this group of women, or in general, men versus women in agreeableness. It doesn't say anything about one individual. You can find a perfectly disagreeable woman, and you can find a perfectly agreeable man. Of course, they obviously exist. Yeah, on average, men are more disagreeable than women, especially looking at large scales. That's the thing that they're hacking. They're throwing away all the justice. And I get really afraid. One of the big things Peterson points out is that major study of, as choice goes up, women tend to choose less money making careers. That's one of those things, a concept like that. If you have an entire university system that's down with P hacking, we could suddenly find some studies in a few years saying, turns out that's not true suddenly. And what we had is a bunch of P hackers change it,
Right.
This is happening right now. It's happening all over.
Yeah. In societies that are more,
that are more egalitarian.
Egalitarian. There become greater differences between the sexes.
The differences in sexes grow. And I promise you, studies of those sorts, instead of fixing the problem, they're going to fix the examination. Just like we see in colleges. In colleges, they have all these scenarios where they have tests. The tests are construct reliable and construct valid. Those types of tests tell you how well a student might do in a certain university or not. They don't want to change getting the kids better or ready for universities or placing in the right place. They want to change the examination. They want to change the examination because they say that it's out of justice. Out of justice, we're going to get rid of SAT tests. Out of justice, it's the way these social constructionists view the world. It's like, we can change stuff by changing the measurement, or just accept that the stuff is real. So this happened this week. Good on her. You want to know what they should have done if you were Biden, or if you didn't want to seem like you were putting your hands down on the scale of judging meritocracy, which I know is a swear word for you. You just announce that she's your choice. You don't front load the announcement that I'm going to choose a black woman. Then you are saying that I'm choosing from the whole entire pool of the world, and from the whole entire pool of the world, she's my best choice.
Hey, everybody, in the name of the message, this is our candidate.
I think, I bet you she's perfectly smart and perfectly well on other stuff. She's got some idea.
I listened to some of her responses. I thought that she had some perfectly fine answers to a lot of stuff.
Yeah, she seems like somebody perfectly capable of being like a judge on stuff. I see that
Yeah.
she's ideologically worrisome.
Right.
But as far as like her intelligence and smarts and work ethic and studying history and history of jobs, yeah, nothing to sneer at there.
Mm-hmm.
But ideologically, there's a lot worrisome about her.
Yeah.
But they messed up themselves. They put their big thumb on the scale, just like they did with Kamala Harris, the quota and the quota hiring and the quota stuff in the TV shows. I guess just kind of painting like a bigger picture here of why I'm saying that this stuff all starts happening. It starts getting mixed in so much, and now it's moving into the STEM fields. It's moving into the fields that are supposed to be objective. It's moving into the fields. I mean, law can get as postmodern as you'd imagine, but these worlds that are supposed to be based off of truth and finding truth and all that sorts of stuff are getting to look like the TV show Julia is to me. Of like, what am I watching? I know Julia Child. I'm kind of only sort of watching a fake ghost of a version of Julia Child, which, well, that's what movies always are. No, I'm saying it's deeper than that. Like, this is what I'm watching has nothing to do with reality. Here's the NFL putting in their new quota. NFL will require every team to have a minority coach in key offensive role. They also say that it can be a woman or something like that. That's something just passed this week. These sort of articles, I've got a cell phone and I pay for extra storage twice. I had to up it twice of stories like these. There's so many of them. It comes out in all sorts of different corporations. It comes out in all sorts of different businesses. It comes out in all sorts of different schools, making announcements. And I screenshot all of them. These are just ones just in the last couple of days. This one actually got knocked down, thankfully, but California, do I have to subscribe to this? And everything is so stupid. Judge says California law requiring diverse company boards is unconstitutional. They did try to pass a law saying that every board had to have the quotas in it, which after a while, you could just imagine how much of a nightmare that would become. And it has become a nightmare inside of universities. Gad Sad and Jordan Peterson have talked about how up in Canada, they can't fund any sort of or get any sort of true scientific studies going on, because if you're a team of people at a university, a Canadian university, and you have an idea to get some funding for a grant to study a certain thing, you cannot do it unless your team is fully diverse. So like if you and me, we're doing a project right here. Say this project is a scientific one. Say we are university students and we want to get a grant for this project, and say it's something perfectly good, like we're trying to study cancer or something like that. And we have a pretty good idea we might be on to something. We cannot get any funding for it unless we bring on a supposedly diverse person to be a part of our team. And sometimes in Canada, it's not just that's ridiculous to try to have to do that. Sometimes the person just doesn't exist. So the answer is just no.
The thing about it is that it goes so much deeper than we're even willing to think about. We have this whole ecosystem, our economy, our everything. And when you start putting stuff like this into play, something's going to screw up and go out of balance somewhere else. Have we not learned that? I was watching nature shows, of course, getting the message there. But like I was watching nature shows and listening to David Attenborough, and he always segues from one species into a different, like when you didn't even think in a million years would have even been interconnected. How are we so stupid to think that if we screw things up in our society and create these unmeetable quotas and unmeetable expectations, guess what? You're going to have to do it. And Peterson was right. I watched another clip that came up and I think he was on Sklavin or something like that in Scandinavia or something. There was a gal on there and she was pushing about getting equal female representation in the C-suite. And he's like, well, what about bricklayers? What about that? And she's like, bricklayers, what does that have to do with anything? It's like, well, wait a second. Why you're talking about it over here, just the C-suite and in positions of power? How about across the whole board? Because guess what? When you start implementing these things, it ends up having to go to across the board.
Yeah. Warren Farrell calls it the glass cellar.
Yeah.
There's the glass ceiling. The women can't get above that. There's a glass cellar. They won't go below that sort of thing either.
Yeah.
But this is James Lindsay. I just Googled just all the different times he said medical lysinkoism, and that's what you're talking about is the dials. Lysenko, Flip and I have talked about it. He was the Soviet era biologist who
He
thought
was the
that
Dr. Fauci of
yeah,
Russia.
exactly. He was the guy who thought that he could cure all food by putting Soviet concepts into growing crops. And he killed a bunch of crops and caused a Holodomor, killing millions and millions of people. And you try to graft your ideology into a world that's a meritocratic world, a world that is a real world, a world that has real consequences. So he started calling it medical Lysenkoism every single time that he sees Biden administration offers bonuses to doctors who create and implement anti-racism plans. School of Pediatrics, Nicole Hannah-Jones from the 1619 Project at the school, UNC, School of Pediatrics. Pediatric Diversity and Inclusion Committee stands in solidarity with Nicole Hannah-Jones and protest recent action by the university's board of trustees block her path. Oh, that was something like the School of Medicine. She wanted to get tenure and she didn't get tenure and she threw a protest. And so then all these medical schools helped her throw a protest about getting tenure. And they backed down and gave her tenure and she still called them racist at the end of it. Up to 300,000 people.
So you control it.
Yeah, and it worked.
Mm-hmm.
Says woke medical Lysenkoism will unnecessarily kill millions in this decade. Best case scenario from where we already are now. If we get out of this catastrophe, it'll be listed with the atrocities of the previous century. Up to 300,000 people facing heart-related illness due to post-pandemic stress disorder. Yeah, that's kind of more relating to coronavirus stuff.
So it's like, I guess part of where I was going with it, with what I read.
Ex-doctors are here in the affirmative action ticket. You got to get in the Latinx. Go ahead, the racket.
So let me just ask you this. You and I, for you guys out there, you don't know that I for years was into recruiting. So I have somewhat of an HR-ish background too, but kind of a little bit more on, I used to recruit physicians. I did pretty well at it, you know. It always ticked me off when I started seeing this crap coming out in like the New England Journal of Medicine when they're pushing this crap in a medical journal like that, of that stature. But I'm not surprised by it anymore at all. But my question here is this. Right now, we're kind of seeing like across the board, like employee shortages. It's kind of like the coin shortage. It's like, well, where did all the employees go? You know?
Yeah.
And
there's a pilot shortage. I saw that one this week. I saw that one. There's a real one.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. But do you think that this has anything to do with it?
Oh, yeah, of course. The shortages are coming up. That's a whole different podcast too. Although it goes in line with this.
The shortages of everything are coming up.
Yeah. If you just go, this stuff just goes forever. This is recent, but I mean, you can
that's
find
the whole Lysenkoism.
100 million stories, and each one of them are going to tip the scale as much as these examples I'm talking about in these shows tip the scale of reality of that show. They're tipping the scale of reality. Critical race theories, medical Lysenkoism is now reality in the deeply blue state of Czech's notes, Utah. This is a couple weeks ago.
We've been pretty blue recently. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll end pulling up a quick recent video on that. But under Utah's race-based allocation guidelines for monoclonal antibodies, a 25-year-old whose parents were born in Cuba gets dibs over the 62-year of white race. I'm surprised people aren't lining it up at the courthouse to challenge this. This is just one of a million. There's been so many of those, and they're going to rack up, and the thumbs and the hands are on the scale. They're on the scale. And it's just waiting for the other shoe to drop for it to all really actually start affecting and killing people. Typical preamble. I 100% believe I grew up in a world where I idolized different people of color or whatever as the best of the best in certain professions that I idolized and idolize to this day. John McWhorter's even one of them. But if we're starting to sort by the skin color, you're culling off the chances of having the best possible options at any sort of time. The best possible option, of course, could always be somebody of any race or color. But that's when you're doing your measurements and your judgments off of a real P fact.
Yeah, well, you're right. It's like my kids grow up thinking that like things were, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if my kids think this, but this generation, they have such a tarnished view of reality, of what was real back in the 80s and 90s, like how things were back then. I talked about it on the last point. You just ask any kid now what they think about Christopher Columbus. It seems to me like
Christopher Columbus is another good example because, like, it's obviously true that we had a Hollywoodized version of the good version of Christopher Columbus.
Mhm.
But the now negative version of Christopher Columbus is an equally propagandistic negative view of
Yes.
Christopher Columbus. You tilt the scales either way. You can't ever just
They can't. Where's
engage
the
in
happy
real
medium?
rigorous history on it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what's the purpose of statistics? You know, to gain clarity by creating smoke, by creating more fog, and
This is a good video right quick. It's just showing Governor Cox of Utah is all woke. I saw another thing of him talking about Latinx stuff and Mitt Romney. Those guys are all just kind of jokes at this point. And then to circle back to NPR, I've started using the phrase, I call my parents, I love my parents. My parents are great and sweet, but they get swept into this. They probably like just go right along with the, well, I think it's great to have the quotas, and I think it's great. This is one of my big birdie fingers to John DeLynn too, or John Larson and DeLynn, because they'll constantly depict all Mormons as like slackjaw yokels. Most of the Salt Lake City Mormons, it's one of the fights I'll pick with the Midnight Mormons too, because Salt Lake City is just a different thing. So many of these commentators weren't ever Salt Lake Mormons, you know, and Salt Lake Mormons it was awesome. We were awesome in the 90s. That's all there is to it, you know, but, yeah, now I call them kind of in general, and it's seeped over into Provo law, NPR Mormons. And that kind of goes in line with the Julia Child thing. And then the thing of Lindsey Hansen getting on Doug Fabrizio and all that sort of stuff, is that they all want to show and kind of give like a hint that like, no, we're down with the NPR. We're doing this. It's kind of like that Atlantic article I keep liking to refer back to, where the Mormon guy wrote a thing saying, I promise we weren't for Trump. I promise we weren't. Please don't make us go to year zero. Please. I promise we're NPR Mormons. It's kind of the Mitt Romney, this NPR Mormon. And that's who Spencer Cox is. And that's what so much of Salt Lake Valley is, man. There's so much. Like I'd wager, I don't have stats, but I bet you it's bigger percentage than not.
you know, people can be controlled and manipulated pretty easily if they can become ashamed.
Well, there's the shame stuff, and that works. And then there's these TV shows and these revisionist histories.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing. It's like, if you can generate some shame out of nowhere, and that's the thing. I need to read more Jonathan Haidt. If there's one guy that could really dig in and figure out and paint a picture of how disgust is being used in our society to hack crap, that's a guy that could do it.
Yep.
And I think that it would be one of the most important things that could be written right now.
Totally. That's one of the things. They had the big five personality traits, and the big five never said we're all there is. What those big five was, we found out we can measure these.
Mm-hmm.
We found out there is a difference from P, you know, P being one. Like we found their stuff does not just go back to the mean on this. We can measure it. Then there might be other things. It's just we haven't figured out how to measure it or whatnot. There might be a sixth personality trait. But Peterson will say disgust might be one of those, that they've landed on something that they can measure.
It's this is the reason why we can't have nice things. It all ends up being a Tower of Babel.
Yep. And I think just as much as Hollywood, like we watched The Critical Drinker and Erotic and At Heels versus Babyface. I watched all these different channels, and they were very, very upset and frustrated with the movie world and the world of television shows, and just how much they make just a living joke out of storytelling nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
I think the whole entire other point is I'm trying to extrapolate out and saying it might have started in academia, but it's for sure gone back into academia. Like academia is not the rigorous place you think it was. And then even those STEM worlds, it's pushed so hard into it. It's getting to the point where I'm already, you and I have a friend. He writes articles. He's a PhD scientist, and his articles are supposed to be explaining the science.
Mm-hmm.
And the articles really come off of, there was this thing this week about these kids confronting CNN about how much they peddle disinformation and that sorts of stuff. Really good videos, because like they got confronted and it was really embarrassing. But our friend, he's just the sweetest guy, and we know he's like one of the most believing Mormonist guys, who knows, over the years. So much of it just comes off to me, and even the subjects he decides to talk about on any given day, of the same thing CNN got accused of this week. You are just the message defender. You know, like every single thing you do is kind of like prep up something to make it look like a big scientific message defender. I saw him do like a large scientific study on fact checkers. And it came out so
Come on, man.
I just saw something today. Jared, who was on this channel, he was sharing with me that they fact checked who was actually making faces or not at the Oscars when Will Smith smacked Chris Rock. There's so many of those fact checks that I've seen that are just outright lies one way or the other. They have their little ways of doing like, this one is missing context, and then something that goes the other direction. Like, that's true.
Mostly true.
Yeah, they're such just complete defects. And then he ran like a meta study of the whole entire thing, and it was just like, man, you are selectively pretending to do a scientific study here to run a defense, and it's very easy to see.
Oh, it sucks, man, because it's like, if you got somebody who's that talented and who has a good understanding of what science really is, if you can't really be a scientist and, like, first off, try to disprove something, isn't that kind of like science 101?
It's the opposite.
It's like,
it's starting with the conclusion and trying to fill in the
sophistry.
gaps.
Yeah. And
Which
it's
we
like,
saw. I mean, I've seen him do his scientific.
But I
proofs
mean,
of where the
at what
inflation comes from. And
at what point does your at what point does your heartburn level like just keep you up all night long? Seriously, this is the thing that drives me crazy, because it's like Solzhenitsyn, man. His whole thing was probably his primary message that I have gotten out of reading Solzhenitsyn is to not live by lies.
Yeah, I said the same thing on Jonathan hasn't released it yet, but I said on the other thing of using the Solzhenitsyn thing is like, let the lie go into the world. It can,
not through me though.
Not coming out of my mouth.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard. It really is hard. I've been trying to live by it when I catch myself slipping here and there in little areas, but sometimes in big areas. But hey, I've learned to be honest about my faults. I don't really have much to hide anymore as far as I just
myself. I think any individual might, how much you want to confront your own issues or not. That's not why I don't really want to go into that. Lindsay talking about that, even though she's just talking about it right there in the podcast.
If you're pushing a message though of that goes contrary to that, then that's the whole thing.
Yeah, but I'm not going to jab very much at if they're doing the Tobias thing and it might work for us. I mean, I've heard that of some different like ex-Mormons, that they're open about it, whatever, we'll talk about it. I don't like to mind read very much. It comes out in like little ways. It's more just like when you're outright telling lies or you're outright saying stuff that is just so lopsidedly biased. My eyeballs bug. If any individual has some, when there's things that are factual statements put into the world that can be, I'm not Jesus or God who can look into their hearts, but I am the one who can say, that's not true. The thing that you said, or there is an opposing side to this thing or to that thing.
Right.
It's easy to do that. But I have this whole other level of, especially when I go talking to people, that it's kind of the Scott Adams thing. Scott Adams talks about everybody's watching. Well, he says it's like one screen, two different movies, but the real truth of it is everybody's seen two different screens. Most people I know have complete different processes of information and YouTube or television shows that they're watching, and just see a whole different aspect of the world than I'm catching. But so I understand that to an extent, but I don't understand when they tantrum when you stop to say, wait a minute, that thing's not exactly, you can't even like start to go, wait a minute, there's a little bit more to that story. We just had, I mean, I love when that kid, this University of Chicago kid confronted Brian Stelter this week. It's such a good video. And he says, look, you guys have spread disinformation on all these different things. And all Brian Stelter says, well, you've been watching a different channel than I've been watching. One guy. And I know so many people in this world. I kind of get mad, or not totally mad, but I don't ever really indulge in very many told you so's. I don't do it. Maybe here on this podcast and this microphone I do, but to my family, my mom who said the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, like directly to us, because she just regurgitates whatever's on the television. Or throughout the whole, I had some friends who out the whole entire Russiagate thing, I was saying there's no evidence for this, and beyond that there's some evidence that this is coming from a bad source. There hasn't been one moment of me stopping and going back and like getting in their face and saying, what now? You know, I haven't done it. I mean, maybe I should do it, but I haven't done it to any of them. There is some sort of level that you kind of like sit and wait and hope that maybe they would come and say, hey, yeah, I guess I was wrong about that sort of thing. But you also just let it bygones be bygones with that stuff. And
Yeah.
or whatever. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe we should rub it in their faces more. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a two-way street, you know what I mean? You kind of have to, but then you have to kind of let it go. Like you said, to be
I
able to
don't know,
function.
'cause I'm not only am I the type of guy that if I was wrong about something, you can rub it in my face, you know what I mean? But beyond that too, guess who's gonna rub it in my face first? I'll probably go rub it in my face. My whole worldview, you could rub it in my face. There was a time frame I remember you'd show me something from Glenn Beck or something, and there's a time frame like, oh, Glenn Beck, and I just didn't even want to hear it, you know what I mean? And over time, especially since he's gotten independent, Glenn Beck seems to be pretty dang honest in a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that, but that was a while back. You were asking about him, and I didn't even know much about him. I just knew kind of Jon Stewart's caricatures of him.
Mm-hmm.
I just waved it off. You could have come to rub that in my face at any point in time, but I'll rub that in my face. I was wrong. Like, Jon Stewart's the propagandist, and Glenn Beck has an angle, but I don't think he's much of a propagandist. The guy brings on like Pete Boghossian on the show, and Pete, if you watch that episode of Pete Boghossian just recently, Pete Boghossian, who's totally James Lindsay's friend and all that stuff, I've seen him do this on Fox News too, is he'll go on and he'll be like, he'll flip the script on them and then come back at them for their own.
Mm-hmm.
And Glenn Beck just rolled with it. You know what I mean? He just rolled with it and put the whole episode up and all that stuff. Jon Stewart could never do that. Jon Stewart could never sit for an hour with Pete Boghossian testing him. He could never do it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's just it, man. It doesn't matter. Somebody can be conservative, somebody can be liberal. I mean, you got, like you said, Pete Boghossian, you got Glenn Greenwald, there's just a ton of people on both sides of the aisle. Tulsi Gabbard going on, I don't know, did she go on Glenn Beck? She was always on Tucker, you know what I mean? And man, I really wish they would have chose her, man.
There was one time when Flip and I had a friend. He assumed that we were just on the same page. And he was like, which Democrat person do you like? And why is it not Tulsi Gabbard? You know, and we were like, what? That's your problem, man. And he didn't know anything about Tulsi Gabbard.
The DNC is such a joke though, man. It's like
I don't know how they're such a joke. And it's a bit of like watching these TV shows become such jokes of themselves that you just realize that you guys have gotten so stuck in hyper reality that you can't even be normal.
It's because they got the corrupt elite class that's never going to be ejected out of it until, who do they got coming up in the future? Maybe AOC.
The cycle of pride and that's humility thing. And it's a bit of what I've noticed in the ex-Mormon world too. It's why I got interested in the Midnight Mormons again and started watching them. Is like, I realized that at first it was the opposite. The order side got a bit tyrannical. They didn't want to look. They didn't want to hear. They didn't want to see. And they got the script flipped on them. Like they had these people, the internet came and people suddenly came and tested them and all this stuff. And the old guard wanted to say, no, but you can't even talk about this. We don't even want to deal with it. And they just got toppled because they were just stuck in a world of no. Don't look at it. Don't look. You don't get to talk. You don't get to talk.
Mm-hmm.
But then you give it 20 years and then the ones who are challenging become the old, the decrepit tyrannical side of it's our way or the highway, and we don't even really want to actually talk to people. And the Mormons, the Midnight Mormons, actually get into it and dive into stuff and get ready to talk and get open and get willing to confront and take on, as Peterson says, go into the part of the forest that seems darkest. And
historical.
It only takes like a little. Yeah, the Latin term.
Instabilinus inventor.
It only takes a little bit of time for stuff to get toppled by kind of its own hubris of thinking like we're the kings and you can't even challenge us, you can't even talk. But then the side that does kind of start taking everything on and talking with it and dealing with it becomes stealthy and smart and hard to deal with and ready to take out the old tyrannical king. And the old tyrannical king is now yesterday, Jonathan Streeter had somebody who did the criticism that you could kind of guess would be coming. We've been talking about the postmodernism and going through all that stuff, and he comes on and says the thing of like, I think you guys are overlooking how much the January 6th stuff, they almost took over the world and all this stuff, and they almost, that mainstream media concept of those guys are the dangerous ones and they're going to come get you and all that sort of stuff. And they don't understand that where the underdogs and the overdogs really are now. And that happens a lot with Mormon stories, because they'll bring up stuff like the church has all this money, so that means they're overdogs. Culturally, they're underdogs. Culturally, they're counterculture.
Mm-hmm.
Culturally, they're the punk rock now. And you guys are the
Yeah.
decrepit old kings. That's just one last thing I want to slip is Jonathan Pajau talking about there is no punk rock without a system. There is no punk rock.
That's true.
You have to have a system for there to be punk rock. And these people, that's kind of the concept I talked about with the libidinal economy and all that sort of stuff, is that you guys don't get to be the thing, the revolutionary thing that you imagine yourselves are and wrap your whole identities and sexuality into, unless you have the system there to rebel against. And it's not interesting. But anyway, any stuff to tack onto this?
No, not. I mean,
with 2
just
hours.
be honest. You know.
Yeah.
Start being honest. Little things. You know.
You'll be amazed how much power it'll give you over time.
That's why Peterson has gotten so big, and I think that he does give me hope because I know it's helped me. I'll just throw this out there. I was tempted today. I went to Home Depot. I bought this big order. Okay, I'm building a pretty large deck in Provo, and I went to go get part of my order today, and a whole bunch of lumber, taking it out to my car. And they have this process where you have to, like, when you do a big special order, if you're getting part of it at a time, they only release what you're getting, right? Well, you have to go to the pro desk to tell them about that, and they're supposed to check you out. And well, I was going out and I had my son with me, and we were pushing the lumber out, and I was kind of agitated because they were shut down the aisles, and that pisses me off every time they freaking shut down an aisle, and I'm trying to carry out a stack of 25 2x8 16s, you know. Anyway, so I'm taking them out to
I
my
do that all
trailer.
the time.
You know, I'm taking it out to my trailer and passing this gal up front. She's, you know, young gal, and I'm like, well, I've already paid for this. She's like, oh, okay, I see your receipt. She didn't even look at it. And I went out and I loaded my trailer up with all this lumber. And I'm like, you should just go and don't tell them about it, because then you could end up like not having to pay for it. You know what I mean? And it's like, no, I really legitimately probably could have got away with it, but I was just like, no, that's not how I roll. You know what I mean? So I went back in. I'm not saying this for any pats on the back, but I mean, sometimes those kind of temptations come up where you're tempted to just pull one over, even if it's just a little thing, a pair of sunglasses or something like that. It's like,
I think you're talking to me, man, because I was thinking about I walked out with some sunglasses from Smith's a while back, and I felt bad about it, and I had them in my house. I'm like, screw it, and then I lost them within like 20 minutes. I'm like, never again. Like
Dude,
I'm gonna pay for these things in the future. Now I can't even go back and pay for it.
yeah.
And,
But I mean, we've all done stuff where we've walked out with a pair of sunglasses or whatever, and you know, I'm not immune to it. You know what I mean? But
I didn't mean to walk out in sunglasses.
Yeah.
Notice, but I should have driven them back that moment. You know.
right. But sometimes there are, I don't know. But the point is that I try to check myself on a daily basis now. Am I? It's like the whole Temple recommend question. Are you honest in all your dealings? You know what I mean? I think that's a pretty dang good question to ask for, you know, to try to keep yourself in check. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's all I got.
Word. Well,
Peace out.
let the lie go in the world, but not through
me.
The end.